the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Joy Pullman is my guest. She's a wife, mother, and you know her from The Federalist. Joy, you recently wrote on how the majority of daycare is a scam. For those aren't familiar with a Minnesota story, if you could share just a little bit more. And then I'd love to dovetail just into a conversation about daycare overall that isn't had enough.
Sure, Timmerie, and thank you for having me on. So the general situation in Minnesota, well, in fact, there's a lot really left to be learned because the investigations are ongoing. But some of the latest information that we found include that federal prosecutors there, publicly stated a few weeks ago that a daycare program that receives both federal and state monies there, at least half of the money annually spent on that program, which is approximately $18 billion in the most recent fiscal year, at least half of that, so $9 billion or more, was fraudulently sent to daycares that were not enrolling any children, but were billing taxpayers for children who were not there, who were not receiving any of the services that the funds are supposed to support. And so this is just a tip of the iceberg sort of thing. I think it's pertinent also to add that there is also a kind of like cultural immigration issue or relative information here, because the vast majority of these daycares are operated by Somali immigrants, since the Somalia is a country that is well known for being, if not the number one most corrupt country in the world, certainly in the top 3 every single year. And so, so that's that cultural component is also related here. But we also, there's just so much to talk about here. But I think just the kind of summary is that this is also probably happening in many states across the nation. There's already, the beginning of investigations finding similar activity in Ohio, Maine, California, just a number of states. And it extends reportedly to many federal, welfare programs, essentially. So we're not just talking about daycare. We're talking about the same sort of systemic fraud is likely marbled across pretty much every large federal program, which is, I guess, all of them. So that's kind of the sort of Minnesota situation. Completely went viral based on, this has been happening for years. It's actually been reported on in local media for more than a decade. There have been, state representatives from the minority Republican Party members in the state, mostly both in Congress and in the Minnesota legislature, talking about this. But it really received a lot of public attention just in the last month, when there are kind of 2 large media figures on the right. Christopher Rufo, investigative journalist, released an article saying that some of these billions of dollars, which eyewitnesses, people who work in security in the airports in Minnesota, say they have seen literally millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of cash brought through those airports to Somalia, to other places in the Middle East. And Christopher Rufo's reporting found national security experts, investigators quoted saying that they had tracked some of these funds from this fraud to foreign terrorist organizations. So not only fraud, but also linked to funding terrorism abroad. And then, so that was the first kind of, really reporting that brought a lot of attention to this recently. And then there was a young man named Nick Shirley. He's apparently a popular YouTuber. He brought a research partner, a fellow named David, who has lived in the state all his life, I believe, who has been independently researching the fraud. He just lives in the area. He's noticed that, there's all these daycares with their windows boarded up, but he's never seen children at them. So he started to look into this, and so brought a lot of the receipts. And the young man, Nick Shirley, was really showing this to the public on his YouTube channel, and that exploded right after Christmas, I want to say. And I believe Nick Shirley just testified to Congress about this issue within the past couple of days here. So that's just kind of the basic background. And then I made this argument connecting it to the idea of daycares. I've been following early childhood education research for almost 20 years. And so I actually am aware of something I think the vast majority of the public do not know, which is that it actually may be better for America. It's not good to have fraud, but for American children, it is actually better that they were not in those daycares, that the daycares were empty, simply because research does link increased risk for low academic performance, a variety of anxiety and behavioral issues with children spending time in non-parent care. The more time children are away from their parents when they're babies, toddlers, preschoolers, that is linked long-term all the way, through adulthood with anxiety issues, behavioral issues, even increased incidences of crime. So that is really something to be thinking about that I know the general public has not been informed of because, as with the daycare fraud story, there is a lot of money at stake. And so many people are willing to put the interests of children in society below, the money that they can make from convincing lawmakers that it is good to help children, to separate them from their parents in institutional daycare.
I wish, Joy, that more people saw the research on daycare. I know it's a sensitive topic, but I think it's become sensitive because we've been told, at least the last 30 years, that we need state-funded daycare. We need all of these programs to help get moms back to work and kids taken care of from the age of really 6 weeks on. Yet we're looking at the research, the brain research, even just the amygdala alone, that brain stress regulation for the child. When the child is supposed to be developing that primary relationship with the parent, it's not just that Catholics want families together and moms home in the kitchen barefoot with babies. It's that this season of life for these babies changed the entire trajectory of their life. And that if you look at it, I remember when the book came out, Joy, from Erica Comazar back in, I think, 2017 or so. She wrote the book, Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. She had done social work. She was a social scientist looking at all the data, and she's saying all the data is here, but everyone's afraid to say it. She was canceled for pointing to the research about neurological and emotional development and how fragile children really are and how they need their moms and dads, and in particular, mom.
Yeah, and this is just a really, really old human understanding, right? Traditional societies always support and glorify the crucial role that mothers have in creating stable, pro-social adults in the future, right? So it's really just in the past, since the 1960s, which in the span of history is a very short amount of time, that we've really departed from that historical massive amount of respect, that traditional cultures give to motherhood, elevating and recognizing, that without a mother focusing on her children, and we both know it doesn't have to be, every single second of their entire lives, but for the majority of their young lives, children need that attachment, that bonding, that security, that really women biologically are primed to give to their children. And I do think that, we have, I think a lot of women's kind of dissociation and fear of what should be normal for us, for loving children, for being in close relationships. I think that a lot of that is driven by, for example, the family separation that has affected them. And so we just kind of are in this really bad cycle of, women who have maybe not gotten, good early childhood bonding experiences themselves, children of divorce, children of never having marriage, it's children of their own mothers, being distant. And then the more that you have that, it increases generation over generation because unparented people become, and on average, not always, it can be overcome, but, it increases the risk of having worse parented the next generation. And so we've got to this point where people are so callous, about the needs of children. And it's because of kind of the, trauma, the lack of bonding, the attachment, and just normal human selfishness that we have. But we really, need to look at that and see it for what it is. I've had to experience that in my own life. I am a child of divorce. It's been hard, for me to kind of work through that and be a mother with my own kids. But for the sake of my kids, it's been really, empowering. It's been enlivening for me to repair both my own attachment while at the same time working on giving that to my children. So I also know, there's social scientist research about that. Robert Caron wrote a huge book about the psychology of attachment. I think it's called Becoming Attached. And he writes about how having a child actually offers an opportunity to repair your own attachment issues. So does marriage. So God created the family to really, love each other. And for those of us who do have broken families, we have second chances with every child, with every new relationship, with every marriage. And so those are opportunities that God puts in our lives for us to expand the love that he pours into us through Jesus Christ.
And Joy, I get it. Being home isn't easy. I was at the zoo with my kids just last week, and I heard 2 stay-at-home moms there with their kids just trying to get out of the house, keep their kids active. And one of them's going on about just how hard it is, how hard it still is being home as she's navigating her second. And I'll raise my hand. I get that. I'm with my kids all day, every day, Joy. And I see my ugliest behavior come out and I see my best behavior come out. And this is part of how God ordained the human person and the trajectory we would walk through toward our salvation. And it can either be a path to sanctification and virtue or a path to ugliness. And we get to choose where that self-giving love will enter in and how we enter into it. And these tiny humans that just get older and older are there actually for our good. And, you know, we talk a lot about the damage of the child and the amygdala, and yet we miss the fact that people are the better for having worked through their own challenges to love and raise these tiny humans as they grow.
Well, I think that's something that Christianity really teaches, that is, again, as Christianity is receding from our culture, it's being lost. You know, people are not hearing that true, vibrant, wonderful, warm message about, you know, the healing and love that comes from being within the Christian family. And it's just actually a really good opportunity for us to share with people who have less, you know, our culture is not teaching and passing on these sorts of truths about, it is difficult to be with the very small children. But, you know, I now have 2 high schoolers and, you know, it is so, I just, you know, if people could think and I think part of this also is we have smaller families and they're more broken, so they're not connected, and you have less of the opportunity to see, you know, where you're going to be in 5-10 years among your sisters, cousins, brothers, aunts, uncles, you know, but if you just can hang tight there, you know, I have the baby years, you know, the lack of sleep, the constant nagging. I mean, there's challenges with every single age, you know, but if you could just think about the amount of rewards that you are going to have from these children in a short amount of time, and be able to be steadfast, you know, through those years and even enjoy them. You know, that, I mean, I just want to give, you know, women just the encouragement, because when I was pregnant with my first child, I was terrified, you know, didn't know that what a delight he would become, what a blessing. You know, I wish I had 10 more of him, you know? And so that's just something that you maybe learn with life experience, but we have less and less interaction, you know, with people who will pass on those life experiences to us to give the encouragement to really stick in there, you know, when times get tough, and they do for everybody.
And you mentioned earlier the disassociation and callousness that's occurring from mothers toward their children and surrounding the attitude of childcare. And one of the big things that comes out as a coping mechanism for women of facing this, and as women have been told, well, children are resilient. Well, we know that that is not true. Just the development of the amygdala, the cortisol levels on the baby, that's quite the contrary. Children develop a resilience through that foundational attachment support that comes from being with mom. It helps to regulate their stress. It helps with emotional security, and that big topic today that we know my generation, millennials down, really struggle with, and that is resilience. At this time with kids is so pivotal. And just kind of thinking about this, Joy, when we dive into it, I love the work of Erica Comazar. She's been one of my favorite guests ever here on Trending. She's done multiple shows with us. But one of the big things she emphasizes is that both the presence of the parent matters and quality matters. Because I think people start to think, well, if I just work from home, that's great. But you actually have to have quality time. You actually have to get on the ground and play with your kids and really listen and be present. And this is such a challenge in our distracted culture today. And so I think when we look at resources, when we look at the truth, especially as Catholics in such a tough topic as daycare, check out Erica Comazar's book, Being There, Why the First 3 Years Matter. In fact, she had to write a follow-up because people said, okay, I stayed home in the first 3 years, but what about after that? So much of her work helps to inspire and encourage women and mothers to see how important your role as a mother is, and this is a sound pro-life position.
That was the best of the week on Relevant Radio. The best way to listen to the best of the week is on the Relevant Radio app, free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.